guest this week is the most wonderful Doug Johnstone. How you doing, Doug? I say call us Jug then.
How you doing,
Doug
Drug?
Johnstone.
That's not bad. Quite often I get in emails, not Drug, I get Doe, because like G and H are next to each other on the keyboard, so I get Dear Doe, D-O-U-G-H. How are you doing, Doe? I'm like, Jesus Christ. Anyway, I'm fine, Luca, how you doing?
I mean, a more professional person would go back and re-record that, but not this one. not me. I'm not re-recording.
No, not you. No way.
So I mean, I haven't seen you for God. It must be ages now. It's been so long. I don't see you ever really, do I?
Last seen in and around the stage on Aberdeen, I think, was the last time we were together.
That was a good gig, wasn't it?
It was a great gig. Oh, it was so good. Lemon Tree's just an absolute banging venue.
Yeah, we'll talk about that kind of aspect of our relationship later on.
Oh, will we?
No, not that part. That's that. So, Doug, what we tend to do on this is we had Susie on last week who didn't have a Wikipedia article, but both Mark and Callie did, and you do as well.
Yeah.
First thing in the notice is that the picture that they use is probably the best picture for an author to have on their Wikipedia page.
Am I drumming on it?
You're drumming on it. You're playing drums with the fun-loving crime writers of Bloody Scotland International Crime Fight Festival 2017.
Great.
So
Sticks flying.
You got the stick. It's all blurry. You've got like this weird glow behind you. Nice shirt. You're not even wearing shorts. You've got proper jeans on.
Oh, that must have been winter time.
So what we do is we go through your Wikipedia article of a sense and see how accurate it is. It's usually
okay.
But we're going to go from the very first line. Doug Johnstone, born 22nd of July 1970, is a Scottish crime writer based in Edinburgh.
I mean that is all true.
Right.
Wow.
But I know you weren't born in Edinburgh.
I wasn't born in I wasn't born in Edinburgh. Quite often biographies say that I was born in Arbroath, which is where I grew up, and that's not even true either, because I was born in Irvine, on the other side of Scotland, because my family all comes from Kilmarnock. My dad was at school with Willie McIlvanney. That's my claim to fame, pretty much. My dad was the year below him at school, but they knew each other because they were both really into English and reading and writing, and they both went to Glasgow Uni, and then they both trained as teachers, so they knew each other quite well. In fact, my dad's got a copy of Willie's first book, like signed, says to Andy, getting in on the ground floor with this one or something like that.
Wow.
So they knew each other quite well, and my dad had always followed his career as a writer.
That's incredible.
It's kind of nuts, isn't it? It was like a small world and all that. They say that about Scotland. It's a small world. Someone always kens your feather.
I mean, I know for a fact that Scotland isn't that bloody small, because you played gigs when you get to Glasgow and someone says to you, now we're going to have a 4-hour car journey. I realised how big Scotland was. So it's not that small. I mean, the population is a lot smaller than England, but the bloody size of it sometimes feels like it's similar size.
It's crazy when you start going. I did an event recently in Skye in Portree, and I just sort of said yes to it. It was like a library thing, and then realised it was a 5-hour drive from here. And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. I mean, it was a great event, but it was like, I was basically there, 5 hours there, stayed overnight, 5 hours back from Portree. Is like, Christ on me.
So you must have, I mean, we're jumping about here a bit though. So you must have met Willie at some point though, because I remember him turning up at Bloody Scotland and things like that.
Yeah, I did meet him. When did I meet him first? I think I met him before he came to Bloody Scotland. I remember vividly because I was really aware of him, not as a crime writer particularly. My dad wasn't massively into crime fiction. My dad liked his other books, like what's some of the other ones? The Kiln, and what's the one about the boxer? Docherty's another one. But he I think the first time I ever met him was, well, I was at the Edinburgh Book Festival. He famously did an event there. Willie did an event there. And it was the biggest tent, like it was 500 people, and it was sold out. Because I mean, in Scotland, he was always big, like he was always actually I had interviewed him before, actually, when Weekend came out. I remember as a journalist, and he'd mentioned to my dad and all that sort of stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, that's weird. But then at that event, like whenever it was in Edinburgh, he mentioned that he was out of print. He said, oh, I don't have a publisher at the moment, and I was like, at the time, I was like, holy shit, I wish I was a publisher. And there was a general sort of gasp of like, 500 people who are fans of his going, how can a guy like him not be in print? And a mate of mine, Mark Buckland, who ran a really small publisher called Cargo, I was there with him. And I just turned to him and he went, yeah, I know, I'm going to try and sign him. And but there was like several other publishers in that same event. One of who was Francis from Canongate, who ended up signing him and then bringing out re-releasing all his entire backlist, starting with the crime novels, but then all the other ones as well. So it was just like, it's one of these insane things. It's like, how did he? It's like he's basically the godfather of Scottish crime fiction. How did he come out of print? That's insane.
It's madness. So you're saying there about your dad he was into English and that type of thing. So I'm guessing then that what did he went into teaching? Is that what he became?
Yeah. So my dad was an English teacher. In fact, Willie was an English teacher for a while as well. He kept the teaching going, I think, as well. So my dad was an English teacher, and he grew up in Kilmarnock, and I lived in Stewarton, which is in Ayrshire. And I was born in what did I say? I forgot. Irvine Central. I was born in the same hospital as Nicola Sturgeon, 2 days apart.
Wow.
So we probably met as babies. Because in those days you stayed in for about a week when you were a baby, and like there's a maternity ward and they kept all the babies in a room. So I was probably crying baby number 1 and she was crying baby number 4 probably. Anyway, who knows? Strangely, I haven't brought that up a couple of times I've met her.
Yeah.
Did you know?
She was at our gig last year. You could have mentioned it.
I should have mentioned it. Yeah. Do you remember when we were babies? No, maybe not. It's a weird thing to bring up, right?
that would be weird. I mean, bringing her up that way would be weird. But I mean,
yeah, that's true. But no, so my dad got a job over in the East Coast, and we moved when I was a baby to Arbroath, and so he was a teacher at various. There's 2 schools, 2 high schools in Arbroath. There's a high school and the academy, and by the time I was a teenager, he was at the academy, and I was at the high school. So he was never my teacher. Kind of, thank God. Kind of the idea of your own teacher at your own school is pretty terrifying, right? Because everyone hates their teachers. But it was interesting because there was loads of books in the house. Obviously, my dad's sort of speciality would have been it was poetry and theatre. Really, he's a really big into theatre and poetry. But he had all sorts of stuff, and so I just read anything that was. I mean, I don't think there was ever any limits on what I could read. I mean, I had a whole room that was just like a wall-to-wall bookshelf that I just picked stuff off the shelf because I liked the cover and then read it.
So, did you have brothers and sisters, by the way?
Yeah, I got an older brother and older sister, so I'm the baby.
Are you the baby? Are you?
Yeah.
So they must have, when you moved, they would have been how much older would they have been when you moved?
So 4 years and 6 years older. So they would have been basically 4 or 5 and 6 or 7. So they remember growing up. They remember being on the West Coast.
So that's a big age gap as well, though, between brothers and sisters.
Yeah, quite annoyingly, I always presumed that I was a mistake. And I sort of like harbored a grudge about it for a long time. And then I asked Mum and Dad about it, and I had a few drinks, and they were like, no, you were totally deliberate. We planned you. I was like, oh, okay.
But you must have been older when that happened. I mean, but did you grow up honestly believing that you were a mistake?
Yeah, I kind of just thought, well, it's 4.5 years, I think. Was it 4? Yeah, 4 years between me and my brother. And I kind of thought, well, maybe they just it was a mistake. But then, it wasn't, apparently. They just wanted another baby. The idiots.
When you got a bit older, though, I mean, when you're in when you get to a certain age, having siblings that are older than 4 or 6 years older, they almost become like a second set of parents in a way. Did that happen?
Yeah, it did, definitely. I think so I kind of definitely felt it when they both left. They both left home to go to university, different universities, but and I was only in. I think I was only in S1, whatever, just straight in secondary school, I think. I had 1 year with my brother, then he was gone. So after that, I was kind of on my own. But I did sort of feel, that they were kind of like they're almost parents. The best thing that I loved about it was, they kind of instilled in me a lifelong love of music. Because they were both, I think it's really important when you've got older brothers and sisters, they're always getting into cool music first.
Yeah.
And so with your age group, your pals, you're going like, well, I know this stuff that like 6 people 6 years older than us are listening to. We should go and listen to it. And so I used to always be sneaking into their rooms and listening to their records when they were out. And it was a kind of wildly eclectic bunch of stuff, which has kind of always stuck with me, I think, because my brother used to be into he used to get Kerrang magazine and be into like metal and rock and stuff like that, and Rush. He got me into Rush. It was one of my favorite bands for a long time. But then also he listened to like the Jam and kind of mod stuff, and also all sorts of stuff. And my sister was listening to ABBA. I was kind of got me into pop music as well. But also like Genesis randomly, and I remember she had Stop Making Sense by Talking Heads. I loved that record. It's like, well, it's just anything, it's just you're just picking up anything at that age.
What did your mum do? Was she working at the same time?
She was a supply teacher, so she was kind of on and off teaching, usually at primary schools. I think she sort of did. She worked with. She just basically worked on and off, teaching, supply teaching if they needed cover, or sometimes she ended up specialising with like kids with special needs. She sort of helped out in with them quite often, but it kind of came and went. So she was home sometimes, but not other times.
What I'm interested in though is that because you moved from one coast of Scotland to the other, did that mean that when you were over there, you didn't really have any kind of extended family in that area?
No, we didn't. It was just us. Basically, all our family was in the West Coast, so we used to go back to Kilmarnock quite a lot because my my grandparents on one side were still living there, and basically all the family we had was all over in Kilmarnock, so we used to go back and forth. I don't really have a massive family. I know you've got a big family, Luca, but I don't really have a massive family. My dad, I think we've talked about this before. My dad was an orphan. My dad, his mum died from complications in hospital giving birth to him. I think she caught pneumonia in hospital or something like that. And his dad had a heart attack when he was about 5. So he was brought up by his grandparents way back. And it was kind of, they were old enough to be like, because he was into reading, and they were like, they thought that was sinful. and it was like if there's a thunder and lightning storm, you would hide the cutlery, under the table or stuff like that. It was just so weird. He was the first of his family to go to higher education or anything like that. And so I didn't have any grandparents on that side. And he had one sister, so I had 2 cousins, but they were all living in Canada from when I was very young. And on my mum's side, she was an only child, so I didn't have any cousins or aunties and uncles that side either. So it was kind of a fairly small, compact little unit, really.
That's interesting. I mean, do you think that had any effect on your relationship with your siblings at that point, though, in the fact that you were all kind of in this foreign environment of a sense, just thrown there together? Did you kind of come together at that point, or were you too young to kind of notice that?
I think I felt I was maybe too young. There was like a bit of, I did feel the age gap a little bit. It felt like them because they were 2 years between them, my brother and sister, and then it's another 4 years to me, and I kind of felt like they were a little bit like doing their own thing, and I kind of so I don't know, we just fought like siblings do. I remember as soon as I got old enough to fight back, my sister got really annoyed. It's like, oh, you don't know your own strength. It's like, you've been battering me for 8 years. Fuck you. But I think kind of contrary to what you're the opposite way of what you were thinking about it is I think it made me really self-sufficient.
Yeah.
That it made me kind of just find, and I think partly maybe the third kid thing as well, where your mum and dad have had 2 kids and they haven't died and they're still because I think even when anyone has, I mean, with our 2 kids, it's like you sort of you kind of mollycoddle the first one because you're panicking, you don't know what you're doing, you've got inexperienced, and then by the time the second one comes along, you're like, I'll be fine, just as long as she eats and sleeps sometimes and stays alive, we'll be happy. But I think there was an element of that with my mum and dad, maybe with the third kid thing, that I just kind of got on with my own shit and didn't really bother. I remember at my I don't know if I should tell you this, but I remember my brother's wedding. He got married quite young, but my mum had a few drinks. She doesn't normally drink very much, and she was like, "Oh, I'm so glad he's found someone to look after him and stuff." And I was like, "Oh, do you never worry about that for me?" Because I was like, I was only 18, and my mum just looked at me and went, "No, never worried about you," which I took to be a compliment because it just meant I was fairly self-sufficient. Like I could cook, and look after myself from quite an early age, just making my own food and stuff, and just looking after myself. That was like, I'll be fine.
It's interesting. I like that though. I think the self-sufficiency thing is probably is the other way of going with that. You do find people who kind of go into the shell, and you can see these closed off families. And I come from a family very much like that, but there was way more of us than probably you. So I'm not even probably, definitely. And we kind of all just, we hung out together for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Outsiders were viewed with caution. Because I remember, like, you'd bring your mates around to our house, and my dad would be like, "Who's that?" It'd be like, "Who's that? Why have you come to my house?" But it's interesting. What do you know what your earliest memory is?
Yeah, my earliest memory is meeting Santa Claus at like a sort of nursery or something. So I was preschool. So I would have been 4 maybe. So he came to like our nursery and handed out presents, and I was like, "Holy shit, it's the real Santa." He's actually bothered to come and give me. I got a little Etch a Sketch, a little thing. That was my present, and I was absolutely over the moon and getting to meet Santa.
I like that one. So you're in Arbroath. This is all in Arbroath?
This is all in Arbroath, yeah.
So Arbroath, for those who don't know, is north of Edinburgh, just still on the coast, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's basically up the coast from Dundee. In fact, it's between Dundee and Aberdeen on the coast. It's nearer to Dundee. So it's and you know how you hear the phrase "sleepy fishing village"?
Yeah.
It's not that. It's basically a rundown shithole town. God bless it. No offense to everyone from Arbroath, but it's well, it's a fishing town, right? It was a fishing town when fishing existed.
Yeah.
And fishing barely exists now, and it was kind of already becoming obsolete when I was there. And so it has reinvented itself in the last 2 or 3 decades as a kind of touristy place. It's famous, I guess, for Arbroath smokies, which is a fish that they catch. Probably not in Arbroath anymore. They catch them up the coast, I think, and you get them down. And it's got the Abbey, Arbroath Abbey, where the Declaration of Independence was signed. It's like a crumbling sandstone thing. And that's basically what it's famous for. But it's kind of standard small town. It's kind of the worst of both worlds. It's not like nice little village territory. So everyone kind of knows each other's business, but it's still big enough that people can be arseholes, and it's like there was I grew up in a culture definitely where I was pretty brainy at school, and you had to hide that. Not to put too fine a point on it, that it was like I was basically constantly the swotty bastard, it's like, check out Johnstone over there. Fucking putting his hand up, all right. Yeah, he knows the answer to these fucking questions, you cunt. And that sort of thing. It's like, but it's sort of weird. I kind of presumed that like everywhere was like that. You maybe had that as well. But I mean, I think a lot of places aren't like that. It turns out, I've discovered since. And things weren't like that before. Like at my dad's school, like in Kilmarnock Academy, when he was growing up, same as Willie McIlvanney in the 50s and 60s, there was a real sense amongst a lot of people of like furthering yourself. Like education was the way to, get on in the world. And that certainly was the case for my dad, who came from working class, roots, and then, went on to become like a teacher. So, but I was kind of the opposite. We were middle class by that point when I was growing up, and I was pretty brainy. But I was in the high school, which was technically the good school of the two in Arbroath. But that's not saying very much. The academy was pretty rough. And there was like a lot of fucking weird shit going on at night. I knew about there's gang stuff, just small town nonsense, which I was kind of on the periphery of for quite a long time, on and off. But I was secretly still, I've always liked learning things and knowing things, so I was kind of stuck in at school eventually. But yeah, it was a strange sort of place. My first novel, Tombstone, was set in Arbroath, and it got a hilarious review in the Arbroath Herald, which basically said, "This is not for anyone who likes Arbroath." And which made me laugh like fuck. And I actually got invited back to the high school to do the prize giving.
Really?
Yeah, the school. And I was like, by a headmaster who clearly had not read the book, because the school features quite heavily in it. We had to change the name for legal reasons. Because it's definitely not Arbroath High School, definitely not. But he obviously hadn't read it, so he invited me back, and I was just like, fuck you.
Oh, I'd have gone back.
Just absolutely tear the fucking place a new arsehole.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, like this, I've looked into because I went to 2 different high schools. I went to a high school for about a year and a half. It was an all boys school. and then I went to a mixed school, and I would love to go back to the all boys one. So I just hated it there.
Yeah.
I spent a year and a half. Now, out of that year and a half, I probably turned up about 20% of the time. I would
Right.
just never go, because I hated it. But I would love to go back there as one of their like alumni, and just then stand up and say like, this was the shittest school I've.
Yeah. My wife went to a Catholic girls' school in
Yeah.
Edinburgh, and she fucking hated it. She didn't make any friends from those 6 years. She could not fucking wait to get out, and she basically didn't get any qualifications. And it was only after that we met each other that she was quite clearly very smart,
Yeah.
working in a pub and a shop. And I was like, and she had all these ideas about doing stuff. I was like, well, go to college then. You can get your higher English at like, night school and stuff. And she did. And she had them getting 2 degrees. But it's like the whole school experience really put her off like any of that stuff. It's weird. It's the same for a lot of people.
Yeah. So you were like as you're saying, you were like a studious kid. You were intelligent. Do you think that comes from the stock that you came from, or do you think it was because you were surrounded by books that had that kind of influence on you to have that kind of knowledge?
No, a bit of both, really. It's a sort of nature nurture thing, isn't it? I think, I mean, I got lucky. My environment was kind of great, and I was kind of my mum and dad. They weren't like hot housing me or anything like that. But I mean, if they were, I would have been at a private school or something. Not that they had the money for that, but but there was, even then within the system. I remember there was a while when, because there's a school, there's Carnoustie's not far from where we are. It's between us and Dundee. It's another town. And for a while, people were sending their kids to Carnoustie High School, which was still a comprehensive, but it was seen as better. It was kind of better place, or Kersnootie as we called it, obviously. But then there was some sort of drug scandal there, and like that's where Dominic Diamond went at. He went to Carnoustie High because he's from Arbroath as well. But yeah, it only scarred him for about 3 decades, I think. But no, but it's weird. So I mean, I guess if my mum and dad had been trying to better me and all that stuff, they might have tried that stuff. But it was none of that. But it was just like letting me get on with it, get on with stuff myself. And I think you kind of just, I think as well, you sort of raise kids. You don't want to sort of push them at stuff at them. It's just, but you want them to be open-minded about things, about trying to inquisitive about whatever their interests are. Encourage it. It's not fucking rocket science, right? And I was really into music. I was playing drums at this stage and sort of teaching myself the guitar. I was in a couple of school bands. I was also really randomly into physics and maths. I really enjoyed that stuff, and football. It's like, it's a fucking pick things out of the air, why don't you? But it's like, so they just sort of encouraged me in that stuff. Just do what you want. And there wasn't any pressure to do anything with any of it, go to university or anything like that. I just kind of, whatever you want to do.
So you had it sounds like you had a kind of an idyllic kind of childhood, in that sense at home. But I know like that if you are a kid that kind of stands out in a certain place, like it was for me, it was just my name was enough around here. There is always difficulties sometimes with other kids. Did you have a large friend base? Was you popular, or was you one of the kids who kind of, sat back a little bit?
I had a number of mates. We were all kind of fairly, not academic really, but not even nerdy. I don't even know how you describe it. But yeah, we had a sort of reasonable. It wasn't a massive friend group. It was kind of small, compact and bijou. But I can remember exactly what you're talking about. That like for sort of S1 to S4 at high school, I was keeping my head down. Like you were basically, until all the bampots left, it was hard work. Like I wasn't the subject of bullying particularly, not any more than anybody else. It's just a general bullying culture in those days, in the 80s I'm talking about. So it was like, I don't think I was particularly a subject. I wouldn't paint myself as a victim of bullying, but there was definitely an atmosphere where I was basically just keeping my head down and not fucking attracting attention. And then that totally changed in S5 when all the dafties left, half of them to join the army or the police force. Because there's a commando base outside Arbroath, so quite a lot of, there's a weird thing where there's quite a lot of English people who have come up and are basically, you know, Marines, like actual killing machines that live and like work in like there. And they're quite often, if they're there for a long time, their families come to the school. So there's a weird juxtaposition with, this is the same time that soccer casuals, the whole soccer casual thing was a scene. That's what the gangs were really. So there was like soccer casuals who were basically idiots looking for fights. They would pick on like Marines. So they would just like get 10 of them against one Marine, they'd batter them, and then the next weekend the Marines would all come down like the high street and batter everyone wearing a shell suit they could find. It's like, so in that environment, I was kind of like, I'll just keep my fucking head down, you know, don't want to get in trouble. But then in S5 and S6 at school, it just seemed so much easier. We kind of all just got on from that point onwards. That there was no fucking hassle.
Do you think you were? Do you know if you were writing anything at this point, or was it writing at any kind of party? I know reading is, but was writing at all?
Yeah, I was. I started writing stuff properly as a teenager. I think probably just from like creative writing exercises in English class. I got on really badly with my English teacher. There was a guy, I won't name him, but there was an English teacher at the high school where I was. He always took the top set, and he always took the top class because he was head of the English department. He's like, and he was fairly flamboyant and quite pompous, and he was a big sort of, you know, you're all going to have to learn Shakespeare now, that sort of thing. And we never did anything in high school. We never read anything that was like written by someone who wasn't dead and who hadn't gone to Oxford or Cambridge, you know, 150 years ago, it felt like. So I didn't really understand that writing was a thing, but you know, there's this creative writing part of it, which was only a small part of it. But I used to really enjoy that. I used to write like little short stories that always did really well. I got really high marks like for them. So I kind of started doing a little bit of that in my spare time just out of interest. And there were always cheery little things. I remember one that I remember was I wrote a thing about a private detective who basically kills himself because he was so fucking depressed. So that was insight into my teenage mind.
Yeah.
I got a high score though, so there you go. Although the teacher did say, "Oh, it'd be better if he didn't kill himself at the end." I was like, "Well, tough."
I mean that obviously shows the kind of the ice and the heart of any kind of writer. You know?
That's what it is, yeah. So I was writing little bits and bobs at school, yeah, and then that kind of grew a little bit when I went to university. I was just kind of, I didn't really know. I still didn't. I had zero concept that writing could be a thing that people did. Do you know what I mean? That I was sort of writing short stories, just for more amusement, really. Occasionally chucking them into like competitions or anthologies and never even hearing back. But not really taking it all that seriously. But I was kind of just enjoyed it for the sake of doing it.
Did you ever show your dad any of these stories?
No, I don't think I ever did. There was a whole bunch of them by the time I was sort of early 20s. There was a whole bunch of them. It was enough for a collection, but they were all, by that point, they were kind of all sort of they were either rip-offs of I was a massive fan of Raymond Carver. Like my dad gave me a book of Raymond Carver short stories, like Where I'm Calling From, which is collected works, which I just absolutely loved, which is weird because it's not like, you know, it's working class Americana sort of thing. And I don't know if you read any Carver, but it's like kind of all between the lines. It's like really understated, stripped back, and but it's just kind of it's in between the lines of kind of, but it's really emotional stuff, but it's kind of really weird. But I really liked that, and so I was kind of ripping that off. You know, you always rip off the stuff you're reading when you first start writing. So I was doing that, and then at some point I read Ian Banks' Wasp Factory, because that came out in the mid-80s. So late teens, I probably read that, and I was ripping that off as well. And then at some point, Trainspotting came out, and then I was ripping that off. Because I kind of, by that time, I was living in Edinburgh, and I kind of knew. I mean, I thankfully wasn't a heroin addict, but I knew people. I was taking quite a lot of drugs in that, you know, my early 20s in Edinburgh, and I knew people like that. The guy we bought ecstasy off was quite like Spud. I mean, so it's like, so we were kind of adjacent to that world. So I was writing my own little stories about that sort of stuff.
Did you ever kind of did you have this kind of feeling though that you wanted to escape Arbroath? Did you want to get out of there? Was that feeling throughout?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely want to get out there, and I kind of I ended up. Yeah, it was just. I mean, it's amazing looking back how if you grow up in a small town, how blinkered, how small your outlook is, like, and you don't even realize it. Like to us, the big city was Dundee. Like, it's honestly, it's like, well, we'll get a big trip out to Dundee and like go to like, it's like Christ almighty, because they had record shops
Uh,
and a bookshop and stuff like that, and like pubs and clubs when you got a bit older. It's like wow. And so I kind of went to Edinburgh University pretty much on a whim. Like part of it was just, well, my sister had gone to Glasgow Uni, and my brother had gone to Dundee Uni, and they did geography and law, and I was never going to do those things. I was quite into physics and maths, so I did physics at Edinburgh Uni. But I was just basically, yeah, I went one. I'd been to Edinburgh maybe 5 times in my life at that point or something. It was like hardly ever. I went on to the open day at the uni and went, oh, this looks nice, and then I put it first in my form, and then I went. I was basically, I think so much of your life is just random chance. I think, or it's just stuff that you kind of decide at that age. And I think nowadays kids, really have to put in a lot of effort to think where's best for this course and what's the best social life and blah blah blah, and where can I afford to go and all this kind of stuff. Those days, I was just like, yeah, okay, let's go to Edinburgh. Fuck it, whatever. I don't know.
this is like late 80s. You still would have had to have worked hard to study physics and in Edinburgh University, though, surely.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I was brainy. I was brainy enough that I didn't have to worry about, and this you're going to be really like a smug bastard. I didn't have to worry about getting the qualifications. I was like, I was a 5 A's guy. I mean, I was like, one of the guys at one of the teachers at Arbroath said, you could go to like Oxford or Cambridge if you wanted, and I was like, why the fuck would I want to do? Just like my first instinct gut reaction was, why the fuck would I want to do that? And I didn't apply for St Andrews either because it just struck me as full of posh idiots. I didn't want to fucking.
There's no hint of regret though, looking back, that you didn't go that path.
No, oh god, I think I would have. I think I would have fucking hated it, or it would have turned me into a different person. I think, one or the other, or maybe both. No, I've zero regret about it at all. I think. Don't get me started on institutionalized bullshit in the United Kingdom, but it's like it just. I think Oxford and Cambridge is. I mean, absolutely no offense to anyone who's been there. Of course, we know people who've been there, of course, but I think that is just, it's not as bad as the private school system, as like Eton and all that stuff, but it's part of the same thing. House of Lords is part of the same thing. The institutionalized deference to tradition and to what is supposedly better fucking people and all that stuff. I find that it makes my stomach turn, like even now. And then it did as well. I was just like, I would not be able to have been able to live myself if I went to Oxford or Cambridge, honestly. I just would have been like, nah, I can't be part of this shit.
It's interesting that, because you may still probably be in that field if you'd have gone to Oxford or Cambridge as well, maybe, than you are now.
Yeah, it might well have been. I mean, I could easily have, gone down the physics route and just stuck at it. It's like,
You may have been Brian Cox. That's who you may have been. Not the good actor guy, the other one.
I mean, I'd rather be the actor guy. He's
The
cooler.
keyboard player in Dream guy. That one.
Yeah, standing on like mountaintops talking about the universe. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. But I mean, it is true though, is that like you could have, if you'd have gone that way, your life is completely different. And there's nothing to say that with your kind of the way you thought, you may have brought the whole lot down from within.
Yeah, smash the system. The House of Lords have been a more like, that's an alternative history novel to be written.
If Doug went to Oxford,
accidentally burnt down Balliol College. Yeah, fuck them. No, but what was quite interesting was that I was thinking about this recently, that like I went to Edinburgh Uni. There was something in the news recently, like last week, which said, it was like the headline was like, ordinary Scottish, working class Scottish students are having their accents mocked by posh English students at Edinburgh Uni. And I was like, fucking, well, what's changed? That was like, I mean, that 30 years ago, that was exactly the same then. But then it worked both ways. It wasn't like we were walking about going, oh my God, the posh people are laughing at us. We were like laughing at them as well. Because Edinburgh Uni's got quite a contingent of, people from private schools and from the home counties and that sort of stuff. Which was my first exposure to that stuff. And it was like a total eye opener. I was like, my God, what, like, they look like fucking aliens. I don't know, who are these people? all these like fucking tall guys with like fucking flowing blonde locks striding about like with actual confidence. I was just like, well, this is fucking insane. Who are these people? But I did realize looking back on it, all this. I mean, I made a sort of a lifelong friendship group at Edinburgh Uni, and almost everyone that I know from that I was friends with then were from working or lower middle class Scottish backgrounds and from small towns. Like people were from Harrington, North Berwick, you know, all sorts of other places, Motherwell, and just kind of working class towns, because that's the kind of people that I'd grown up with. So that's the people I knew, and we kind of just naturally gravitated towards each other. I wouldn't have said anything about, or we were picking each other because of that. It's just that's the kind of people we naturally became friends with at uni, which is quite weird.
I think that kind of does happen though. It happens still now.
Hmm.
All of the friends that I've made in this business have all been from not always similar, because my background is quite low,
Yeah.
but but there's still that working class, low middle class kind of background. Even
Yeah.
within the band, you know, I wouldn't say that any of us were from, you know, rich stock. You know what I mean?
Can you all decide that I'm the poshest?
I've always said I know, because I think you've got this sense of like, you know, you've got your feet on the ground. I've always said Chris is probably the poshest.
Yeah. It's
But I
hard to
don't think he is.
He's not. I mean, you would never call Chris posh.
No, because as soon as you hear him talk, it just kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, the poshest should be Val, because she's the one who actually did go to Oxford.
Yeah, she's gone to Oxford, yeah.
But honestly, that's the last word you would ever use for Val, who is feet so firmly planted on the ground he couldn't move it.
Yeah. But what's interesting talking to Val about stuff like this as well, we've all had this conversation. It's like you absolutely do that, like that thing of code switching, like when you talk to people, like, and I think it's perfectly natural. I don't think it's. I mean, I remember thinking someone said to me, "Oh, it's really bad, like because you put on a posh voice when you're talking to." Because if you're on the radio, if I'm on the radio, like Radio Scotland or Radio 4 or whatever, I do talk differently, because they won't fucking understand me if it's the same way I'm talking to when I have a builder in, like doing work in the house. Because like I'm talking, basically, my kids did that recently, because we have had like builders, and they were like, "Dad, you know you speak differently like, to the builder." I was like, that's so he can fucking understand me. Like, you know, because I use different voices, but everyone uses like 100 different voices all the time, and you do sort of adapt yourself like a little bit to your surroundings. Because Val's talked about that, you know, that she's got a radio voice that she uses for if she's on, you know, quizzes and stuff like that, and that's not how she speaks to us, right?
No.
And it's not how she would speak to people back in Fife that she's, you know, in the local shop or whatever. That's something else as well. So it's like everyone does it, and I think that's perfectly normal. I don't see any problem with it.
I think it's true. I don't know if I've got the ability to always do it. Sometimes I'll go the other way. So like if I'm expected to, I'll get even more scouse. So it's like then it's almost like a sod you. I'm gonna try and make you like confused, which is stupid. But like I did an event in a library in Huyton, which is like it's a suburb of in Liverpool, as much as a suburb can ever be in Liverpool, but it's like on the outskirts of Liverpool. And because it was amongst people who would understand me completely, I just did my completely natural accent. If that event was recorded, no one outside of Liverpool would probably understand a word anyone said. There is just that kind of. So I have always, and I slip constantly. That's why Stuart Neville will constantly bring up the whole burger thing. It's but it is true, is that you do, but I've never got that sense from you that you haven't even thought about it that way. Is it just a natural thing that you do then?
It's just a natural thing you do. I mean, I'm speaking differently to you now, and I go on, like, I remember when my first book came out, my dad said to me, I didn't even realize you swore. Because I'd never sworn in front of my mum and dad. Because I mean, you can just switch it on and off like that. You can just absolutely do it. And yet the first book's absolutely full of drinking and drug taking and swearing and generally bad behavior. Because that's the kind of fucking thing that I knew about. And I remember. I mean, it's sort of famously. I don't know if like Scouse is quite the same, but in Scotland, you know, there's basically, I think Frankie Boyle said something along the lines of like, you know, people use fuck like a comma.
Yes.
Like basically, or in between words, just like while you're waiting for what you're actually going to say. It's like fucking whatever, like that. You do that all the time. And I just grew up speaking like that, and it's like, and I just, but you can automatically switch it on and off, like if you're in certain circumstances. But I know what you mean about sometimes at book events, like I'll go the other way as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially if I had a couple of drinks.
Yeah.
If I'm in like quite a posh thing, like if we were like at Cheltenham or something like that,
Yeah.
like, and you just sort of think, fuck it,
Yeah.
these people aren't going to buy my fucking books anyway. So,
I mean,
so
that's one of my favorite ones. Is like, we can't remember where we were, but it was a nice setting, and we were all like, it's all right because Doug's going to be the first one. He'll say cunt.
yeah, that'll be me.
Got about
Yeah.
30 seconds in, I think he said it.
So
But,
good.
so let's go back to, you went to university to study physics. So this is
Yeah.
late 80s now. So this
Yeah.
is late 80s to early 90s. What was Edinburgh like at that point?
What was it like? Again, it was it's weird talking about that thing about having like sort of quite narrow horizons. Like I kind of I took that with me a little bit to Edinburgh almost, in that we just stayed in the university area. We were that typically bad experience of a student, in that like they're not integrating at all with an actual city. Do you know what I mean? That we were kind of, most of the Edinburgh unis in the south side of the town, just south of the centre, and we just kind of hung about in that bit. And we kind of, I mean, I don't think I visited Princess Street in the first year I was there, because why would you? Because like, but then there's a whole other part of the city, because I mean, the kind of Newtown and just north of the centre is where a lot of the better off and richer English students were staying, and then coming into the other part, because that's, the prices, the property prices were fucking much higher there. So we were in the sort of south side, which was fairly nice. It was rough and ready. It still is a little bit. It's not got an, it's not like crazy, but it's always got an edge. Like there's a bit in Clark Street. If you walk down the sort of main artery from the east end of Princess Street, gradually as you go out, it's just a bit weird. It's just a bit Bampotty. There's like, there's like kind of weird little shops and fucking places closed up, and just kind of slightly odd vibe. But I like that. I've absolutely loved it. That the south side of Edinburgh is like, still feels like kind of my heartland, really, walking about that bit. I mean, I haven't lived there for a long time, but kind of going up and just hanging out there, because it just feels like there's an energy to it that's really nice. And that's where, and I guess we were integrating, because we were going to like old man's pubs and stuff like that, and just, and you're always using the sort of local corner shop and blah blah blah, the kebab shop and the chippy, and going to the same clubs as locals and stuff like that. So I guess we were integrating a little bit. It just maybe didn't feel like it. We didn't have our head up enough to see around, mainly because I was mostly steaming the whole time.
So was you in bands at this point?
Yeah, I was. I'd started being in bands not long after I came to Edinburgh, because that was round about sort of late 80s, early 90s was kind of when the grunge thing was kicking off, and we knew people in various bands who had sort of slight connections to Seattle before that thing all took off. At one point, I was living with a guy, Murdo, whose brother Alex was a tour manager for like bands, just kind of sometimes not even signed bands, but sometimes first album sort of stuff. So he was bringing over like Nirvana, Mudhoney, Soundgarden, L7, stuff like that. Were just coming over and playing like 300 or 400 capacity venues like around the UK, and he was in charge of it all. So we knew a lot of these people. We met a lot of them anyway, and we were in our own bands, just kicking around. I was in a band called Cheese Grater.
The best band name ever, Cheese Grater.
I saw a picture recently. We had a massive like backdrop, like a big, like a bed sheet with like a massive cheese grater painted on it, and then cheese grater written across. I mean, it's beautiful. It's a really nice bit of artwork, but it's like, I mean, our whole thing was we were not taking ourselves too fucking seriously, like, but it was like fun, and we like there's a famous venue in Edinburgh called The Venue, which is now no longer exists, but which is where hundreds, every band that came through town pretty much played The Venue, and we knew the guy Richard who booked the bands, and and some of our mates used to work behind the bar and stuff like that. So we were quite often supporting, like first band on, you get a local support in for anyone who's coming through town. So we played there, and I lived in there. I used to go there 4 or 5 nights a week. rather playing or just seeing bands that are coming and going. So I was really a big part of that. Like, it just felt like, I mean, everyone was unsigned and just fucking around, but we were all kind of just in each other's bands and sort of helping out. And there was another band called Dunder Funk, who are like this, because it's the same time as, like, you know, funk metal and Faith No More and the Chili Peps. But I mean, they were like bands getting sort of small record deals, you know, putting actual records out and stuff like that. My mate Craig was in a band called the Joyriders, who got Single of the Week in NME twice. And I went on back to being a band with him later on. But it's kind of, we were on the edges of stuff, you know, and 99% of these folk never make it, which is just the way it works out. But it's just really interesting. I fucking loved that whole scene.
Did you have a designer? Did you ever know, even growing up, what you wanted to be when you were older? Like,
no. I mean, if you'd asked me,
I don't get that sense from this.
No, I didn't. I was just fucking, you know, shuffling through life, really. If you'd asked me as a little kid, I would have said, like, you know, captain Scotland football team and be the first man on Mars. So not much has changed.
But to be fair, one of those kind of has come true.
I have captained a Scotland football team. Yeah.
Exactly.
But no, I didn't really. Honestly, that's why I kind of think I'm at the stage now. My kids are both teenagers, and one of them's going to go to uni, and one of them's picking subjects and stuff. And I just think, just do what you like. Just do what you enjoy doing, because you can fucking change anything at any time. And I had zero idea what I wanted to do. I honestly had none. Until I was probably in my late 20s, really, before I had an idea of something that I could actually do that I might enjoy. And that was kind of journalism and writing. But before that, I was just sort of tootling along. I loved being in bands. I really enjoyed studying physics, actually, undergraduate level anyway. I really enjoyed that. And just fucking, you know, just having fun, basically.
Because, I mean, you studied physics, you did a PhD.
Yeah.
After that, so you must have done well. You must have got a first.
I'd got a first, yeah. I got so one of the reasons I did a PhD was that was 92. I graduated from my degree, and there was a recession then. I mean, when's there not a fucking recession? But there was deja vu. But, so there wasn't really the job market. There wasn't really much going on that I could see in terms of jobs. And I wasn't that arsed anyway. I was like, I don't know. And they offered me a PhD basically because I'd got a first. And they said, look, I mean, it was an experimental physics PhD, which means it's kind of like a bit like a what's the fucking word? It's a bit of a machine for turning out PhDs. Sometimes physics, like some of the physics disciplines, can be, because they're doing big experiments. We were doing like particle accelerator experiments, like CERN and sort of like and the Hadron Collider, but on a much smaller scale. But it still needs 20, 30 people. You know, you need actual engineers to, you know, to build the things and all this sort of stuff. And you need data processing, because we were doing it still on tapes. Like, we were getting basically, so somebody, you know, when you ran an experiment, basically you'd go for a week to Mainz in Germany or Lund in Sweden, and they needed bodies to do the night shift to make sure it ran through the night and change the tape machine and check the data points and stuff like that. So I did a lot of that grunt work stuff. So I didn't really enjoy it, because one of the reasons I liked physics initially was the sort of big picture stuff, the stuff that I'm writing about now in the Skelfs books, about like weird stuff like relativity and astrophysics and quantum mechanics and all this kind of really sort of mind-bending stuff about physics. And you do that in your undergraduate degree as well, but then the PhD, it became a really practical sort of number crunching grind thing, where you weren't really doing any of that stuff. You were just like, had like massive screeds of data, and you were trying to work out what the fuck was going on in your experiment. And so it was a much more practical thing, and I kind of just was like, well, I got to the end of it because, you know, because otherwise it would have been really annoying to to not finish. And they were giving, I mean, at those days you got a grant. It wasn't a lot of money. It was like £5,000 a year or something. So I used to do part-time jobs to sort of, you know, lab demonstrating and tutoring and stuff like that, and occasional other just like naughty jobs. I worked as a security guard for a while.
Where?
Well, I worked for a group 4. They're now called something else.
He had to change the name because he kept getting into trouble, I think. So he decided
They
to have
let they let a bunch of prisoners go, didn't they?
yeah, that's
from-
what it was.
They did. They genuinely did. So I worked. That was kind of my main summer job. I did that every summer, and quite often during term time, and certainly at Christmas and Easter as well. I used to work for Group 4 Security. So I was basically sitting in empty buildings, making sure they didn't get robbed or vandalised. For which I was very ill-equipped. But I was like, you spend hours just doing nothing. And this is even the day before the internet and phones. Oh my God, what did we do? I think I just read books.
I mean, that's probably that's probably right. You probably did
Yeah.
just sit there and read. So I'm just going back to your parents. You mentioned like one of your brothers went did geography, one went did law.
Mhm.
You're doing physics. I mean, they must have been just sat back, just going, "We fucking won parenting."
Yeah, 3 kids at university. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, I don't know. Yeah. So my sister ended up being a primary teacher. So she's close to retiring now, actually. My brother's still a solicitor. He works as a solicitor. Yeah, and I got a PhD in physics and then became a writer. What went wrong?
I mean, yeah, if we forget what happens like 20 years after, it's fine. But just at
Yeah.
that point, they must have just been looking at each other. I'm telling you now, there'll have been a moment where your mum and dad looked at each other and just went, I think we did all right.
Yeah, I think they did, because especially from where they came, because they were both working class, and they were the first of both their families to go to higher education. My mum actually dropped out of university after a year or two, so she never got her degree. But they, yeah, I think considering where they come from, it's like, I think most people are like, well, as long as I can try and improve the lot of my kids compared to how I grew up, then you've done a good job. And that was certainly the case for them. I mean, my dad ended up, because he was a teacher and then he became a headmaster. He did other jobs as well. He was like an advisor for the council of an education department and various other things. But he ended up being a headmaster at Harris Academy in Dundee. Like, that was his kind of final job before he retired, and that was like one of the biggest like comprehensives in Scotland. In a very mixed area, which had like really quite rich housing and really quite poor, and a lot of kind of ethnic minority communities and stuff like that in that area as well. So it was a hard job, and he worked long fucking hours. Like headmasters, you're fucking, it's not the school day and then you go home. And he basically worked, everyone moans about teachers have 6 weeks off. It's like, well, he had about 3 days off because he was basically catching up on stuff for the first 2 or 3 weeks and then prepping for the fucking next school term. So he worked hard, and yeah, we did all right. We did okay.
It's amazing. But there is a gap here because your first novel, Tombstone, doesn't come out till 2006.
Yes.
And it says here in Wikipedia, you've got your PhD, and it says nuclear physics,
Mm-hmm.
and then a diploma in journalism.
I do have that, yes.
And then it says, before embarking on his literary career, he designed radar and missile guidance systems for military aircraft.
Well, that is almost correct,
yeah.
but not quite. What is it? I didn't design them, so somebody else designed them. I worked when I finished my PhD. Actually, I got a job in Edinburgh. I was applying for various jobs. One of the jobs I applied for and I got offered was a job. So this is again coming back to that thing of how your life could have been totally different. I got offered 2 jobs. One was as working as an engineer for Marconi in Edinburgh, and the other one was I got a job as I think the official title was desk editor for like a physics magazine. So it was writing. Right. So it was a writing thing. It was down in Bristol, and the money wasn't great. It was like, it was $2,000 less than the engineering job or something like that. But I really wanted. By that time, I think I had an inkling, might even have just been subconscious, that I wanted to do something about writing. So in that, I was kind of thinking science communication, something like that. But they were looking for someone. It was kind of still fairly technical stuff, I think. But it was like you were editing and writing for a living. But I took the Edinburgh job partly because I had met my now wife, and she was in Edinburgh, and we didn't want to move. She didn't want to move, and I mean, just to stay in Edinburgh, so I get a job, and pay off some debts that I had by that point as a student. So I started working for Marconi, and yeah, I didn't design the radars and missile guidance systems. Somebody else did that, but I was part of the mathematical modeling group in the systems engineering department, which meant that we wrote like mathematical modeling programs So somebody else designed it, and then we put the spec of it into our model to see how it would perform, basically, and then to see whether it's going to, the plane's going to blow up or like whatever. You're not going to be able to detect fucking anything at that rate or whatever. So we worked in liaison with the actual designers, but we were part of that same group. But I pretty much hated that job from the first day. I could not be fucking bothered. So I was when did I started in 95, I think. Yeah. So I must have started in 95. So at that point I was still playing in bands, and I was running a kind of fanzine thing that like me and some mates had just it was a really stupid sort of knockabout thing. But we used to basically write stuff, like kind of spoof stuff. It's effectively the kind of thing that is nowadays would be found in the Onion, except local. Like there used to be a thing in Edinburgh called the Shavers Weekly, which was basically that. It was basically local news, but a piss take. And we were a rival of that for a while. And so I was kind of writing, but that was just hobby, spare time. We kind of knew a guy who, a mate of a mate who ran a print shop, and he used to let us go in at night when nobody was using it, and we just to get steaming, take an 8-pack of like lager and try and print the whole thing off, and then staple them all together badly, and then take them out to pubs and stuff like that. So I kind of was doing this job in the day, and then I was in bands and kind of writing about stuff at night. And I just thought, fuck it, I can't be doing this office job. I had no passion for it at all. I had no interest in what we were doing. I didn't care. And I kind of thought, well, I started to like do proper reviews for things. Like I wrote and then sort of submit them to the List magazine, which is like Time Out in Scotland. And the Edinburgh Evening News, and there's some musician magazine. There used to be a bunch of like musician magazines, the kind you pick up free in music shops.
Yeah.
There used to be one called Musician Weekly or something like that. I can't remember. And they had like review sections in them as well. So I kind of started looking at the sub guidelines and sending stuff off for bands I liked, and just writing reviews. And I started to get a couple of things published. Like the List was one of the first few people to publish me, and I got some things in the Edinburgh Evening News, and then I sort of thought, well, maybe I'd love to make a go of this. This is what I'd like to do. So I just quit. After 4 years working in engineering, I did that. I didn't quit stone cold quite, because I quit to sort of go to Napier Uni and do a diploma in journalism, which wasn't really, I didn't get too much from that because I was already doing it. I was already on that course. It was really funny because there's like almost everyone else was like about 21 years old and had a degree in English, and we're now doing a diploma in journalism straight after. And I had like 7 years of studying physics and then 4 years as an engineer. So I was like about a decade older than them almost. And I was already basically getting published in some newspapers and magazines. So I was kind of ahead of the game a little bit. But it was just good discipline. And then I started basically really hammer. I was like busier than ever because I was trying to get work as a freelance journalist. I was constantly just chasing down work, and this is kind of back. So that's 20 years ago now, over 20 years ago, back when you could just about make a living out of being a freelance arts journalist, which that's completely fallen apart now. But in those days, and I was just writing about anything and everything. I started to get shift work in the Evening News, sort of doing stuff there. When the festival came around, that was like an absolute gold mine because you could earn more in 1 month you could earn in 6 months otherwise, because you just go out to 5 shows a night and review them all. I used to get home drunk and type up the reviews and send, as long as they were in by 6 the next morning for the Evening News to get published them at lunchtime. It was like it was a fucking money earner. So I absolutely fucking loved it. Absolutely loved doing that. And it started, obviously, subconsciously made me start to take my own writing of fiction more seriously, I think, at the same time.
So Tombstone comes out in 2006. I'm assuming it was written a number of years before that, though. Mm. So when do you think that might have been, when you might have started writing that book? So
actually, I wrote a book before that. So going back a little bit. So I quit my job in 1999 in October. Then I was a journalist doing a diploma for 9 months while also still freelancing. I remember I started writing my first novel in 2003. in January 2003. It was called The Ossians, and it was my second novel that came out, but it was like a totally different version of it at that time. So this is basically, you know, the old write about what you know thing. It was basically about an unsigned indie band touring the Highlands and playing shithole venues and falling apart in a mess of booze and drugs. Strange that. And I didn't really have any concept of what a novel was. I mean, I'd like, you know, I'd read a couple of how to write a book things online and novel and books about them. And so I wrote this novel, and I think I got a draft together, but in about a year, on and off in between freelance stuff. And I bought the Writers and Artists Yearbook.
Did you?
Yeah, I bought it, and I basically went through, looked at all the agents that might be interested and all the publishers, and I basically emailed them all and said, "Here's this book," and it's basically, can't remember what my pitch was. It's something like, you know, probably referenced Ian Banks and Irvine Welsh and whatever. It's sort of riotous look at modern Scotland, blah blah blah, with lots of drink. And it's, you know, it's the old thing of like diminishing returns. I didn't have an agent, so if you email 50 of them, like, you know, 25 of them even don't reply. Of the 25 that do, 12 of them say no thanks. Of the 12 that are left, you know, some of them want to see it, like 3 chapters, and then they never get back to you. And then they want to see the whole manuscript, the ones that are left, and then they don't like it, or they never get back to you, they ghost you. So I never got an agent, and I didn't get a publisher, but a couple of editors got back to me and said, I really enjoyed this, but for whatever reason, it's not quite there, or it doesn't fit with us. But if you're ever doing anything else, writing anything else, I'd love to see it. Which was kind of enough of a kick up the arse, because at that point, I had no fucking idea. I had zero concept of whether it was total garbage or it was, you know, a work of staggering genius or whatever, or somewhere in between, most likely. And so that was just enough to say, well, maybe this isn't complete garbage. Maybe this isn't total shite, and I can actually write a little bit. So I then quite quickly wrote a draft of Tombstoning, and sent it to both of them, and they both offered to publish it.
Wow.
Which was fucking incredible, really.
And this was Penguin was your first?
Penguin was my first. I got 2 offers, and at that point, I had a sort of weird thing. I didn't have an agent still, although I had then been in touch with an agent who was interested. You know what it's like, Luca. It's a whole sort of roundabout malarkey. But that was through an editor. That was through an editor at somewhere at Heinemann that I'd sent it to, who said, "We can't publish it, but I know an agent who's really looking for young writers," and so he passed it on to an agent who was a pal of his. Because let's face it, for me and you, we're on the outside. Everyone knows each other in fucking this industry. Like, it feels like they're all kind of just, they all went to the same half a dozen schools, or they all just got the same fucking parties or whatever. So he said he had a pal who was an agent looking for writers, and so she got in touch and then said, "Well, yeah, I really like it, but it's already been turned down by all the people who I would have sent it to, because I'd sent it out straight to them." So anyway, so I was talking to her, and then I got these offers, and she did say, to be fair to her, she said, "Look, you've done the hard part, you've got offers, but I can negotiate it up, I can check the contracts, I can blah blah blah." So I then had an agent and a deal with Penguin. The other publisher was Serpent's Tail, who offered on it at that time, which would have been interesting in a different route, and who knows what. But I mean, it's the old Penguin were offering twice as much money. I mean, we're talking about a pittance, but it was still twice as much of a pittance, right?
Twice a pittance.
Yeah, 2 pittances. So yeah, my first 2 books were Penguin. It was an editor there who called Judy Moyer, who had worked for like decades for Canongate, and she was responsible for like Louise Welsh, I think, and Michelle Faber and James Robertson and some really fucking, you know, big Scottish writers. And so I was like, well, fucking, she knows her shit. Let's go there. And she only worked at Penguin for a few years. The Penguin opened an office called the Penguin Scotland office, because there's quite a successful Penguin Ireland, right? And I think they want to sort of mirror that, but it never really got off the ground for whatever reason. And I think they just, you know, someone high up in Pearson Group at the time ended up shutting it down just before my second book came out, which is great, which is very handy. But yeah.
When your first novel came out, did you think this is it? This is the moment, and now, you know, you obviously weren't a full-time writer at that point, but was that kind of what you were thinking? Oh, this is. Did you have any preconceived ideas about it or anything?
No, I was really naive, and I don't think Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, kind of we quite often do workshops and stuff like that for aspiring writers and stuff. And one of the biggest misconceptions you see all the time is like people want to get that first book and they think that's it. This is it. I've made it. And it's like it's the first rung on a ladder. Like, it's the first step of a career if you're lucky enough. And I can think of, loads of writers that I did events with in the early years, because since 2006, who had one book out or two books out and that was it. And have gone on to do other things, or they just can't get published. And and it's incredibly hard to keep going in it. I had no concept about any of that. I didn't think this is it. I kind of just, I've always had quite a good work ethic. Like I don't know whether that comes from how I was brought up, or it's just it was in me anyway. That I just, that's from the studying at school and uni, I just got on with it. Kind of methodical and just get through it. And it was super helpful when I was a freelance journalist. It's like, because I worked as an editor sometimes in the evening news desk, and it was amazing if you said to someone, right, write me a 500-word review on this, and I need it by 5 p.m. It's amazing how many people would not do that. Like professional fucking writers. If someone asks me for 500 words by 5 p.m., they get 500 words by 5 p.m. Right? That's what they get, and that's when they get it. And it's like, and if anyone, like, people would send you 1,200 words like 3 hours late, and you're like, what? Have you lost your mind? This is not like what do you think this is? This is not a hobby. This is a newspaper, for fuck's sake. I remember another editor, like the film editor at the List, once said to me, like, Doug, every time I commission a review from you, I get the exact word count. I was like, yeah, because that's what you asked for. If you ask for 800 words, you get 800 words. You don't get 799 words, because that's not right. You get fucking, what do you, is that weird? I just think journalism, so many people are fucking journalists. It's just so stupid. Anyway, that's a little rant of mine. But like, it's the same, that work ethic, I think, was the same with writing novels, that I just get on with it. And when Tombstone came out, I was already working on rewriting the Ossians. And then when the Ossians was coming out, I had already written a third novel, which didn't get published, which we can talk about more if you want. And then when that didn't get published, I was already writing the fourth novel, that then became Smokeheads. And I just saw it as like, I just thought, I've got fucking loads of stories I want to write, so I'm just going to write them. And I didn't really understand the industry at all. I still don't, to be honest. I think you know much more about the industry than I do, Luca, but it's a black box sometimes.
Only because I go in with the preconceived idea that it's all bullshit.
Yeah, I still don't understand the industry really, but I mean, there was a whole thing where when that second book, I mean, I didn't realize when when Judy was sacked, basically, she was kind of let go by Penguin about 2 months before my book came out, and I just thought, oh well, somebody else will be really enthusiastic about my book at Penguin. Of course, that didn't happen. The book fucking dropped like a stone, and nobody gave a fuck, and you couldn't buy it. And then I'd written a third novel, and then I got passed to a couple of other editors, and neither of them cared. And then somebody else who had an incredibly posh name I won't mention, who I just saw her name in the email. I thought, well, she's not going to like these sweary, drug-fueled fucking Scottish rants. That's not going to be her cup of tea. And strangely enough, it wasn't.
But you do. It takes a few years, but you do go on to. I think you did six books, 5 or 6 books with Faber. Is that right?
Yes, I got 6 books with Faber. Yeah.
So, I mean, you carried on pretty much a book a year once you get back to Faber, and you've carried that on since. I mean, it has kind of, for the last 17 years, it has taken up the majority of your kind of life, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's like, I was looking at I've got a list of my annual earnings from 1999 onwards, and I was earning like a few £1,000s a year when I first started as a freelance journalist. And then, it kind of gradually goes up. Sometimes it goes down, you have bad years like anything, but it's kind of, if you look at it overall on average, it has been going up, but it's a kind of war of attrition. I've always had, I've never made all my earnings out of writing a book in a year. At the moment, it's about half, to be honest. It's directly from selling books, selling foreign rights, large print, audio, film and book options, everything else. and events. I mean, a lot of I work for various other people, like institutions, doing some teaching work and some manuscript assessment and stuff like that. And so it's kind of like what they call a portfolio career. But I think that establishes really early when I was also doing journalism. I did that alongside writing books for quite a long time. I still do a little bit of journalism, but it's kind of just to keep my hand in and, you know, get to review books that I love and find out what's coming out, stuff like that. But it's like I always kind of had to. The bottom line is, at some points quite early on in that, because around about that time when the first book came out, me and my wife had our first kid.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's obviously a stressful time in terms of everything, but also financially. And we were trying, and then at one point we had to try and get a bigger house when the second kid was coming 3 years later. And so the bottom line is that whatever pays the bills gets done first. So, so that's why there was a book every 2 years or maybe 3 years between books early on, because I just had to get, I had just to do the stuff that paid at the end of the month and not that paid 2 years down the line or whatever it might be for a book, you know, whenever you're going to get it. So I just had to do stuff like that. But it gradually, I mean, I got, of course, you get lucky at things, but a part of it is just that work ethic. A lot of the people I work for, like the literary consultancy, I assess manuscripts for them, but it's like, you know, I've never missed a deadline. If I have to write a report for such and such a date, it gets written by that time, or I have to have a fucking good excuse, like I had a stroke or something like that. But it's like you get, and that stuff, then you just keep getting hired. You keep getting this stuff. And it's the same with the books, I think, almost. I mean, obviously you can write a shit book like anything else. You can sort of have a bad time of it, but it's like, if you're under contract, I always sort of, my skin crawls when I see, we both know writers, you might be one of them, Luca, who doesn't always hit their deadlines.
Only recently.
But I know, I've spoken to some people, I won't name any names, but you know, I know writers who have never hit a deadline.
Yeah.
Ever. And that just puts the fucking, I would just be mortified with myself at that. And I know that
I didn't, and it hurt to miss one the
Yeah.
first time, and now I don't even know what they are.
That's fair enough. But I'm still the same. I still hit the deadlines. I'm writing more now than ever, actually. I'm writing more than a book a year at the moment, which is just because I'm fucking loving it. I'm loving it.
Do you feel that you're getting more more recognition now, especially since the Skelfs books than you've had previously in your career?
Yeah, I think the Skelfs books have been a bit of a game changer. I think, I mean, before that, all my books were more or less standalones. There was a couple that were slightly connected, but it was basically the standalone books. And yeah, I think, and they weren't really like mystery novels. I mean, they were sort of thrillers. I don't even know how you describe them. That's another thing I could talk at length about. I don't even understand what genre it is, to be honest.
I'd say the early Faber ones are different to the Arenda ones.
Yes, yeah. So and I think part of it is me just growing up a little bit, and part of it was like the Skelfs. I mean, I'm so glad that people are connecting with those Skelfs books. I mean, in terms of sales and in terms of reader feedback, especially, it's been really gratifying because it was an absolute 100% deliberate decision for me to try and do something more expansive than I had before. I'd basically been writing deliberately sort of single POV characters with this on kind of thrillers with more or less one plot line, deliberately claustrophobic, but you know, you're in that sort of world for like a short bit of time. And these were meant to be much bigger, 3 POVs, 3 or 4 storylines, solving mysteries and all sorts of other stuff, existential pish in the background. That's how I sell it. But it was kind of deliberately an attempt to write a bigger kind of book and one that connects more with readers, and that has paid off, which is incredibly gratifying. I mean, I guess it might have been shit and people wouldn't want to read it, but it has been really gratifying that readers have gravitated towards these books, and I don't know if it's more respect or what, but it's it's certainly, people are maybe taking them more seriously. And I think they've done better outside of Scotland as well. I think, and that was actually partly down to, I mean, Karen Sullivan, my publisher at Arenda, was kind of part of her ethos was, when I first signed with Arenda, was that, you know, I was already reasonably well known in Scotland, but she wanted to make that the case, you know, in the rest of the UK and elsewhere at the same time. And I think the Guelphs books has been a good vehicle for that. And I've just been amazed by, I mean, it's the first time I'm the other way around from many crime writers, and it's the first time I've written a series, and it's, I can see, for a long time I couldn't see the point, and now I see the point.
Yeah.
And like all the feedback, all the reader feedback is about the characters, the three main characters in these books, you know, which is what you get in a series, because it's kind of that accumulated knowledge that readers have and spending time with these characters. I mean, nobody ever falls in love with a plot, right? People only fall in love with characters. And that's been really nice. It's been really nice to get that.
So you talk about your work ethic and you know, and how important that was to you. We'll talk about this because you had a very different lockdown than a lot of us did, in the fact that you locked down a lot quicker than us. You had a stroke in the early March 2020.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if I've told this story on this podcast before about how I found out and how I thought you were dead. because of our mutual friend Phil Patterson. He's him sending me an email that I didn't see all of. So all I saw was, "I'm really sorry about Doug," and I was convinced you were dead. So the story is that, you know, you're one of the fittest guys. I mean, like, I know you are one of the fittest guys I know. We've played football together for the past 7 years. You drum on stage, which is another thing that we haven't really talked about. You know, that's a physical act. You're more than 12 years older than me, and I'm way. So I just assumed that nothing would ever happen to you. All the people in the band, other people in crime fiction, you were the one I felt safest about. Has
this been a wake-up call for you, Luca?
No, not at all. So what happened was, I had got on a plane. I was going to Boston and I was traveling down to Connecticut. It was when I was researching my last book. Yeah. And there was supposed to be Wi-Fi on the plane, and it didn't work until about half an hour before we landed, when all of a sudden it came on for about 10 seconds, and it flashed up with this message from Phil saying that, like, you know, I'm really sorry about Doug, and I was convinced you were dead. And it took a good 2 hours for me to find out what had happened. And in those 2 hours, I literally just landed in Boston, and I was in absolute bits. From your perspective, you don't know any of this is going on, because, like, you know, obviously you're but like there was a lot of talk. I mean, like, Mark was in Florida at the time, and we were having conversations about it because we didn't know what was going to happen. What did happen? What happened? You were on a hill. What happened?
Yeah, I was on a hill. I had a stroke. End of story. No, so I had a stroke. It was the start of March 2020. So I go up. There's like a hill next to Arthur Seat in Edinburgh called Crow Hill, which is not far. It's Crow Hill. It's quite easy for me to get to from where I live. So I used to just go up like lunchtime, kind of a bit of like fitness and fresh air. So I went up one day, and I was about halfway up, not even halfway up, and I started to just feel really dizzy. I thought, that's a bit weird, and I sort of basically sat down and then vomited in the grass, because the kind of world was actually, you know, it's that whole, like, you know, when you get really drunk, it was just like your whole world's like totally spinning. I had an absolutely pounding headache at the base of my skull, at the back there, and I was like, holy shit. So I was lucky in one sense, like an old guy was just walking up the hill. And I wasn't even at the bit. There's halfway up. There's a road goes round that's usually closed, but it's open for cyclists and stuff. And sometimes, but he got me up to. There's a bench and a thing and by the road. So he helped me up, and I got to the bench. Then phoned my wife, and I said, look. At the time, I thought it's like a migraine or something. I was like basically dizzy. I mean, I had no idea. I don't get migraines. So I just thought, this is not very good. So I phoned my wife, who came from work, and basically picked me up there, and then I went home. Because I just thought it was a migraine or something. I went back to bed and tried to sleep. I think I did sleep for like an hour or something, but then I woke up and just felt exactly the same. And at that point, I couldn't. I puked a couple of more times, and I couldn't walk, because I had no balance. My sense of balance had completely gone, so I had to hold on to things to get around or anything. And so it's like a series of things. I phoned the doctor, and we spoke for ages actually about, basically, can you do this and all this sort of stuff, and like all the kind of hand movements and stuff. And but I had none of the normal symptoms of a stroke, none of the sort of muscle kind of relaxing stuff or anything like that. And eventually he said, look, it doesn't sound like a stroke, but come down anyway to the surgery. So I did that. And then we did all the same stuff again. I tried to walk across the room and fell over. And he said, look, I genuinely don't think this is a stroke. It could be labyrinthitis or something else. But just in case, you should maybe go to A&E. So I went to A&E, and then I saw a consultant, and he said, yeah, did all the same stuff. And they went, doesn't look like a stroke. So but maybe you should just get a scan just in case. So I got a scan, and it was a stroke. So it was a moderate cerebellar stroke, which is the cerebellum's, but it's a very unusual part to get a stroke in, apparently, your brain. Who knows? It's amazing once you get like a serious medical illness that you become an expert in that, all the terminology and stuff. It's really good. So only 2% of strokes are like that, but it's apparently can be very serious. But I was very lucky in one sense in that my symptoms weren't that extreme and my recovery was very quick. I was in the stroke ward for like 2 or 3 nights, I think, and there was like 4 beds or 6 beds in there, and like I was easily the best off out of everyone in there. Like there was a couple of guys in there who I don't think were ever getting out. And the day I got out, another guy across from me got out, but he'd been in for a month, who was about my age. So I was kind of really lucky that I regained a little bit of balance, and I had a kind of really bad sensitivity to noise for a while. But it was like I was allowed to recuperate at home. Apart from anything else, they needed the bed in the ward. But it's like, once you're signed off by an occupational therapist, if you can go to the toilet and pull your trousers back up, they'll let you go home, basically, I think. And I was back to writing within 3 weeks, basically being home. So that was basically, I couldn't, for the first week or two, couldn't leave the house. It was I had to hold on to the walls to get around. And then just as I was sort of able to go out the house, like go for walks, then lockdown started. And the entire planet had to stay at home. So so that was fun. But I just got back into writing really quick, and it's weird that since then I have just been absolutely pummeling it in terms of writing, to the point where I think I mentioned to you earlier that I've now written 5 books in 3 years since then. I'm just getting on with it.
Did you have health issues beforehand, or have you always been? You've always struck me as a very healthy guy.
Yeah, I'm reasonable. I've always been pretty healthy. I've got mild asthma, which I've noticed has actually got a little bit worse. Maybe that could be a COVID thing since then, or it could be I had a really terrible cold at the end of last year, which made my asthma a little bit worse. But no, I'm generally fitting well. I had a hernia operation 30 years ago, and weird thing in my stomach. Who knows? Just like I don't get any normal stuff. It's just random weird shit. But the thing with the reason that they think I had a stroke was because I didn't have any underlying factors, like my cholesterol's normal and all that sort of stuff. They think I did have a hole in the heart, which sounds more extreme than it is, because like I think a fifth of people on the planet have, but basically virtually no one knows that they got it, because you don't find out unless something like this happens. So basically there's a flap between the ventricles of the heart when you're born that closes up as you get older, like a lot of things, kind of from a baby onwards. But for some people it doesn't close up properly. So what they think is that it doesn't really affect anything, but unless what they think happened in my case was that a blood clot went from the left to the right, or whichever way it is. It sort of went through the hole. Now, normally what happens with the heart, like you say, you become an expert in this shit, don't you? But normally what happens with the heart is that the blood clot goes into the ventricle, comes back out, and then it goes to the lungs, which then basically diffuse it or tidy it up or do something with it. It means it doesn't really affect you. But if it goes through the hole into the other half of the heart, that goes straight to the brain. Right. The blood flow from there goes straight to the brain. So that's why they think it, because it was basically the entry point into the brain stem. So they did some tests. This is all during lockdown. I had to go into hospital, and masks and sanitizing gel everywhere. And I did have a hole in the heart. So they closed it up. I went in for a day. I was in and out the same day for an operation to get it closed up. Where they go in through a vein in your leg. It's mental, isn't it? And like go all the way up to your heart, and then basically put like a metal cocktail umbrella through the hole, and open it up and pull it back. So I've got like a little 18mm metal cocktail umbrella in my heart at the moment.
In the first few hours of this happening, when you didn't know what was going on, being a healthy guy and not understand, you saying you didn't even know what a migraine was because you'd never had one.
Yeah.
How scared were you?
I don't think I was very scared, actually. I was just kind of you just kind of felt like a little bit, when something extreme happens like that, you sort of shut down a little bit to just basically do the basic stuff you need to do. Like, so it was like, right, I don't feel well. And my wife was instrumental in this as well. And that she was like, look, you should phone the doctor. Okay. Because guys are fucking terrible at phoning doctors.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I'll be fine. And he was like, no, phone the doctor. And then the doctor said, no, come down. Right, fine. But you just sort of go, well, these people know what they're fucking talking about. Let's go and do what they say and get them found out. So I wasn't really scared. I remember I was because when I went to the A&E with my wife, and my daughter came as well, because she was still probably too young to leave at home really at that age. She came with us, and I was more worried about her seeing me, because basically she was helping me to walk because I couldn't walk. And I think she was more frightened, and that kind of made me sort of annoyed that my daughter, that my daughter was worried about the whole thing, because she's quite an emotional person anyway, and that kind of disturbed me a little bit. But I was more scared actually the first night in the stroke ward, because once I'd had the diagnosis, I then made the fucking mistake of Googling it. And discovering that X number of people said something like there's quite a good recovery rate, and 50% of people survive for 5 years after they had it. I was like, what? It's like the stats are not good. But I mean, I guess a lot of people. I mean, mine's was called moderate. I mean, that depends on the size of the clot. So it wasn't small and it wasn't large. It was in the middle. But yeah, just don't ever look up the stats of things. Like, oh, Jesus Christ.
I mean, that's the thing that happened, is that like once I'd realised you weren't dead, when we realised, oh, shit, it is still serious. It was a massively big thing. There was a moment there where I thought, will we ever get to doing what we've been enjoying doing for the last few years before that, which was the Fun Loving Crime Writers?
Yeah.
I thought that was over at that point. I remember saying to Mark on the phone, we were both in the States, and I said, I don't think we'll ever get back on. I just can't see how we'll recover from this, because in my head a stroke is, that's pretty much it. Like, it's like, I thought that was, you'd be in a wheelchair forever. I just didn't expect it.
Well, I mean,
recovery has actually been unbelievable to me.
Yeah, it's incredible to think. I mean, there's a guy, I've got a neighbour that lives down the street who had a stroke, a much worse stroke than me, like a few years before. And I still sometimes see him in the street, and it takes him a long time he's walking with a stick, but it takes him a long time to get from A to B. And I just think myself, really lucky, touch wood and all that stuff. But the thing about, it never occurred to me. I never thought it was that serious. Maybe it was part of my psychology that I was downplaying it or whatever. I can remember because we had some WhatsApp chat, a couple of days after, and at that stage, because we had a gig at the Queen's Hall in April, so it was about
about 4 weeks later or something like
that.
Yeah,
something like that. And I was sort of going, yeah, I'm sure I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And you were going, no, I mean, even if you feel fine, I don't want you fucking falling over and dying in a gig. I was like, what's interesting is at that point, there wasn't even any suggestion of COVID. Because, I mean, COVID was a thing, we knew about it, but the idea of going into lockdown, even at that stage, again, it came on so fast because we were still talking about whether to cancel the gig or not. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, well, the whole world's cancelled, so just forget about it for the next year now.
I mean, that was the thing, is that I think we had 3 or 4 gigs lined up. We were going to do Basingstoke and Milton Keynes, and Queen's Hall was the big one and all that type of thing. And I think we said, well, we'll instantly cancel on the first couple because that's just no chance of getting to them. I just remember with conversations of because you know, we should explain what the band is. It's like, you know, we're in a band together, which is mad, and we play Glastonbury. That's enough. That's enough, I think, to do, you know. But we have become like this proper little tight knit group of 6 who
Yeah.
You know, and I think that solidified it for me was at that point is that we were all just incredibly worried about you. And even though we were getting these messages from you that you're like very like bullish and like, yeah, I'll be fine. We were all just scared, I think, still at that point that like, you know, we didn't really know because, you know, we're all from different parts of the country as well. 2 of us were in a completely different country altogether.
Yeah.
And like, you know, it was very much like we were just very scared that like, you know, we didn't know what was going to happen and what you were going to be like afterwards. And it turned out that we didn't know for another 18 months whether or not we could have done it anyway. But
Yeah. And that
that point,
actually, that did work in our favour. I mean, I think, you know, I think I probably could have played that Queen's Hall gig, but it wouldn't have been very advisable. But I'm glad that we had, you know, it was 18 months or whatever it was until we had it got in a rehearsal room again, because it just all sorts of things like, I mean, there was all sorts of fucking resetting of like people's lives for COVID anyway.
yeah,
A little bit like that for me. I still have a sensitivity to noise, but not just in the volume. So I don't know if you noticed it, but the first rehearsal back, whenever there's any feedback happening in the room, I have to stop.
yeah.
Like if everyone's playing the right thing, it's fine.
Yeah.
God forbid. But if there's some fucking underlying rumble or like whine or something, I have to like I find it quite like weird with my. I might invest in these, like, you know, the earplugs that cut out sort of ambient
Yeah.
noise. I might get pair of them. So it's interesting. But the thing about the band, coming back to that, like you mentioned it, is like it's so interesting how it does. It feels like a little gang now that
Yeah.
is like of absolute best friends, and I fucking love it because like I was thinking about this the other day. I don't feel I'm not very good at joining in things.
Yeah.
Like I'm not very. It's part of my personality, I think, an institutionalized kind of writer sitting alone. But you know, I don't do a lot of stuff. There's quite a big sort of sense of community where I live in Portobello in Edinburgh, and I don't really get involved in that shit. Uh, although I mean, I know I should. You know, I know I should, you know, make connections, because you know people who make connections live longer and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's good for your soul and all that stuff. And although the crime writing community is incredibly welcoming, it genuinely is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I think a lot of it is very London centric, like, you know, like anything in the publishing industry. And I don't necessarily feel a big part of that. You know, I kind of feel a part of it, but not like, you know, there's not, I don't have like a bunch of best mates who are like crime writers and stuff like that. And it's the same with maybe the Scottish literary scene. I know people who are outside of crime writing, you know, I know we get on fine, been great, but and I'm now a science fiction writer, and I don't really feel part of that community either yet. Yeah. But with the band, I really do feel a part of that, and I think it's been quite a hard thing for me to admit that I need that stuff, because I don't really join in things a lot.
Yeah.
But the band has been so good in that respect. And the other good thing about it is that I'm kind of my role in the band is like the curmudgeonly bastard who doesn't put up with any shit. So I quite like that I basically get to tell Mark to fuck off every time he comes up with a stupid idea. Bless you, Mark.
It is. I can. Yeah, I'm on board with everything you say there. It is like it's great. And what I think is the best thing about it is there's possibly almost 30 years as a time span between how old we all are and everything like that. And I know if there's a couple of years quite similar in age. I'm the younger one, obviously, and then like Mark and Val are the older stalwarts of the band. It never feels like anyone's, you know, the leader. You know, we're all in it together. To find something like that at this age, in this career that we have, is I think is a little bit of magic. It's just one of those things that you just can't explain. And I think it's a glorious thing that we have there.
I mean, Val has said that. I mean, she's saying, you know, if you told me I'd be spending my pensionable years in a fucking band with 5 guys playing fucking Debbie, playing Blondie, like Pretender songs, fucking. And there's another thing. There was a time when I won't go into details, but there was some discussion about somebody not wanting to go on with it or whatever, and maybe getting someone else in. And at that point, everybody else in the band just went, "Look, no, like
No.
it's either us six or we quit. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
it's not a question of getting another musician in or another crime writer in to do whatever. It's just like we are now a unit, and that unit stays or it goes as a unit. It doesn't. There's no question of like anyone dropping out or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's it now, isn't it? It's like it works it works who the six are. It doesn't work any other way for me now. That's just how it is, and it wouldn't be as fun. And it
And I
wouldn't.
wonder if part of that is we got lucky, maybe, but part of it is that you naturally gravitate towards people who you know are going to be all right in that scenario.
I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about who you kind of gravitated towards when you were in school and university. We're all from a very similar background in the sense that we kind of all have just found this kind of this group, and it would be. I think it's just worked out well, and I don't think again. I think it's like a little bit of magic that happened there with that, and it just you couldn't replicate it, you couldn't mess with it because I think to mess with it kind of screws up the whole idea of it, and I think that's what it is. Do you foresee a time though where it doesn't, you don't have that kind of thing going on? Would you think you want to get insulated again or not, or you're happy with the kind of balance you have?
Sorry, you went a bit glitchy. What was that?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, do you ever foresee a time when you kind of do want to insulate yourself again, or you're happy with the balance that you've got now?
I'm happy with the balance now. I think it's like I mean, I need to stop insulating myself. Basically, I know it's fucking not good. It's like it's a weird. I don't know if it's just. I don't know what it is. It's quite deep rooted. I think though that I'm not. I just like my wife's always taking a piss at me for it. It's like you're the miserable bastard who doesn't want to fucking go and meet people. It's like I never. It's weird because I never used to be. I was really very extroverted. Like when I was at university and sort of for that period of time and into my sort of all through my 20s, I was absolutely out every night and with all my like a big group of friends and stuff like that. So I wonder what happened to me that I just became a writer and stopped socializing. Now it feels awkward. I mean, I think lots of writers have that sort of, the social awkwardness of because we don't do it all that often going out. So you go to a festival and there's all this kind of people get anxiety and sit in their hotel rooms at festivals and stuff like that. And I can understand that, but at the same time, you have to kind of push yourself out of those like comfort zones, and just try and fucking do stuff. And I'm always interested in writing new stuff, and I'm always interested in doing new stuff, opportunities if they come up. I think that you have to just kind of part of you is like you feel it in your chest, going, "Oh shit, I'm quite anxious about that," but that's a good thing. I mean, you get that from. I mean, we've been in bands for like decades, like me and you, different bands, and yet it's like part of it is like before you go on stage, like you're shitting yourself, but that's good. That's if you weren't shitting yourself, it means that you don't care.
Exactly.
So, you can use that anxiety, and I think we do. I think you transport that into the energy you take on stage, whether it's actually in the band or even book events or stuff like that. Actually, that you kind of take that energy on board with you when you're going.
Do you feel like there's been any kind of shift within yourself since having the stroke in the last couple of years? I mean, do you have a greater sense of your own mortality now or not?
Walking about smelling the roses. No, it's yeah, I'm very wary about that stuff. It's such a cliche to sort of you have a life-threatening thing. Seize every moment. And
yeah. I'm not talking so much about that. I'm just wondering if you have like because you're saying you've written 5 books in 3 years. Is that because you worried that like how many years have I got?
Yeah, well, I think it does. You do start to. I suppose I have thought about that a little bit more. When it just after it happened, I think I wasn't thinking about it at all. Partly a defense mechanism, partly COVID was happening.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think everyone was kind of just incredibly anxious about that element of things. Like, because at that time, before we had vaccines and stuff, everyone was like, what the fuck is, are we going to be stuck in our houses forever, potentially, and all that sort of stuff. So it was kind of swamped by that stuff a little bit. I think these days, I do think about it a little bit more. Like when if I get ill, like when I had that really bad cold, it was like a month of not feeling well, just with a cold. It's so fucking annoying. It's like not even it's just like Jesus Christ. And I became really down during that just because I was like, this is partly because I was just like, this is such a fucking waste of time. I
Yeah.
can't do anything for a month, and it's like, this is rubbish. And I don't feel well. All I can do is like watch like fucking repeat seasons of Parks and Rec, which is fine, but it's like try and cheer myself up. But it's like I can't even, read properly because I'm just not feeling great. I got headaches and sleepy and stuff. So I just kind of get, I don't know, angry is too strong a word, but I kind of, I get annoyed at myself for being ill a lot.
Yeah.
That's not a good, I mean, that's not healthy, I don't think, because I mean, you're supposed to be all positivity and all that sort of stuff because you're supposed to get better, isn't that? There's like some psychological evidence that if genuinely a positive mental attitude helps you recover physically from things a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But then I've got a fucking inner cynical bastard going on, so it's tricky.
I don't know if you can hear that, but that's knocking in the background.
Oh, is that the Grim Reaper?
I don't know who it is. Abby, get the door, will you? This is what happens when you have teenage girls. They don't like to leave the house, leave the room.
Or answer the door, yeah.
Or answer the door.
Yeah. I'm familiar.
I can now hear the other daughters shouting through the door, let me in. I'm going to leave all this in, by the way. This is all just part of it.
Oh, yeah.
But you'll now hear me try and get my daughter. Abby! No, she's got it. She's got it. It's fine. It's fine. Oh, for God's sake. But I feel like what you're saying there is more about like, the time thing is playing behind you.
No, I kind of do. So it's about if you're thinking about the amount of time you have left.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
So I kind of think, not consciously. I don't sort of sitting about. I'm not sitting about all day thinking, "Oh my God, I could die in a minute." But I just want to get on with things. I just want to, I've enjoyed writing the most out of my entire career in the last 2 years. I really enjoyed every bit of it. Actually, the writing, the first draft, the editing, everything else. And it's the reason why, like, I kind of felt like the fucking training wheels were off a little bit. I mean, the first 2 Skells books were written before I had my stroke, but they were kind of already doing that kind of branching out stuff. The third one, Great Silence, was I just chucked everything at it. I had this sort of, and because quite often you have this internal voice saying, is this too weird or too fucking mad? Well, I better not do it. But then I was just like, fuck it, put it in. And then I wrote a science fiction novel, for fuck's sake, which is going really well. It's doing really well. And it was exactly the same with that. It's like, well, if not now, then when? Just fucking write the books you want to write. And then the fourth Skells novel, and then second science fiction one, and it's just been going on. And I'm loving the writing process at the moment, and I'm just really enjoying not giving a shit in one sense. That it's just like the kind of I was never really that constrained. Some kind of different writers that we talk to feel more constrained by publishers' restrictions or their kind of opinions, or if they've got contracts, what they have to deliver along a specific kind of lines. I've never really been that kind of writer, perhaps to the detriment of myself commercially. But I just can't fucking do it. I couldn't do it, and I just wouldn't. Not even that. I wouldn't even know how to start writing some of the books that other people write. I wouldn't know how to do it. I wouldn't have that skill set. So I kind of have always just written, and all the time I was at Faber, like my editor Angus never knew what I was writing. I just wrote it, handed it in, and then he either bought it or he didn't. Which, looking back, it was quite a fucking crazy way of doing it, actually.
Yeah, just a little bit.
But I did that for 6 books, and then eventually I wrote one, and he didn't buy it. It's like, it's okay. Well, then Karen bought it at Render, and it's kind of been the same principle. I don't really. Karen's just like, yeah, write whatever you want to write. I know it's going to be great, which is incredibly reassuring. One of the problems that I think a lot of writers have in the industry at the moment is they don't feel they have the confidence of their editors and publishers. Like, they don't have the backing of it. Do you know what I mean? I think that could be quite a common complaint. And I have to say that I absolutely do feel that I have the confidence and the backing of my publisher and my editor. That's one of the reasons that has enabled me to just write whatever the fuck I want.
And talking about writing whatever the fuck you want, the spit is it's right there. Actually, there you can see it. I've decided that I'm going to start putting the books that are on. This is the book that the person who's. I should probably say this at the beginning, but this is the book of the person who's on, and then this is the book I was currently reading. So it's like a nice little thing in the
Well,
background.
that's good. That's good.
So The Space Between Us, which came out a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Science fiction, octopus.
Yeah.
You ended up on the telly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gone all right.
Yeah, I write 14 fucking crime novels and don't get a sniff. One science fiction book. They've never had a science fiction book on
No.
in the covers either, so it's quite unusual. I mean, again, I got lucky, I guess, in one sense, but it's part of it. I mean, it got sent to Nina Patel, who writes for Prima magazine, who gets 50 books a day or whatever sent to her, and she happened to pick it up and read it and really liked it, and she made it book of the month, and she's one of the advisors for the show, and she passed it on to people in the production staff, and someone there read it and really liked it. So it kind of great. I mean, it was incredibly gratifying being on the telly. It felt really weird. Obviously, it's quite a sort of unusual experience. Well, I mean, I was in a bunch of famous people said nice things about the book, which is incredibly gratifying. And Sarah Cox was really nice about it and all that sort of stuff. What was really I found quite odd was people after it was announced that it was going to be on the show, people would keep congratulating me.
Yeah.
Well done, I'd done something. Well, I'd wrote the book, right? It was the same book the day before they chose it to the day after they chose it. Do you know what I mean? It's maybe just part of my Scottish fucking not wanting to accept praise thing. It's well,
that's exactly what it is. Because what people were doing, they were just happy for you. And
I know. And
I think it also makes a difference that it's not someone who's published by one of the big five. I think it was a huge thing that this was an Arenda book that was going to be on between the covers. I think that was a big thing as well.
And I think so, yeah. I mean, Karen was basically exploded about it.
Yes, I can imagine.
And excitement. It's just totally fine. It's funny because I don't know why. Karen said to me on the day before it was going to be broadcast, "Are you nervous?" I was like, "No, I'm not at all nervous." And actually, Liz Nugent, who's on it most recently this week, they all loved her book as well. Strange Salad. She sort of said, she messaged me saying, "Oh, I'm totally shitting it," and I thought, well, I genuinely wasn't. I wasn't nervous at all, and I don't know why that is. I think it's maybe it's your 15th book.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had books that have been bestsellers, and I've had books that have totally fucking flopped, and everything in between. So it's I just sort of think I'm a little bit fucking zen about stuff now, and this might be partly after the stroke as well.
Yeah.
I'm just writing the books. That is entirely my focus, is on making the book as good as it can be. And I'm not really, I think if you let yourself get carried away and super excited about this stuff, then you also need to let yourself get absolutely dejected when a book does shit. And that's not the kind of person I feel that I am anymore. I'm just kind of yeah, great, nice one. I'm absolutely not denigrating the whole process. It was amazing to be on it. But inside, in my heart of hearts, I wasn't nervous or anxious or, going to explode with pride or something like that. I was just that's great. I'm so glad that more people will maybe get to pick up this book because they've seen about it on the show, stuff like that.
It would have been absolutely hilarious if Alan Davis had a proper gone for it. He was "This is the shittest book I've ever," because it's Alan Davis.
I don't know. I sort of wonder about, because I mean they don't obviously get told what to say. Obviously not. They're allowed their opinions. And some of them, I mean, I think Samantha Bond on my episode was kind of a bit, not really for me. And there was somebody on Liz's episode who was just well, it was a bit too dark for me or whatever. And he's obviously that's fine. But I think the good thing about it is that the atmosphere they create, like Sarah Cox as presenter and just generally the production staff, Cactus Productions or whatever they're called, they create an environment where people are being generous. So, I mean, they are also picking books that they think they know people are going to like.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So, because they're obviously good books, but they're obviously challenging as well. Mine was a science fiction book, and part of the thing that went on in that episode, and part of the feedback I've been getting a lot is this, I wouldn't normally read science fiction, but which I get all the time with this book. Almost every blog review is kind of started, well, I'm not really a science fiction fan, but part of me is kind of quite gratified by that. People are maybe, stretching the horizons a little bit and reading something outside their comfort zone. But also part of me wants to sort of go, well, why? How? I mean, that seems quite restricted to say I don't normally read science fiction. That's fine. People can read whatever the fuck they want. But I've been a huge science fiction fan my whole life, and it's such a wide breadth of genre. Like just like crime, is that like it doesn't necessarily need to be a space opera in the same way that crime novel doesn't necessarily be a police procedural or a psychological thriller or whatever. You'll always find something within that genre, and to sort of it feels a little bit like the general public attitude to science fiction is where it was to crime like 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Because like, it used to be like a long time ago, be like, oh, I don't normally read crime, but nowadays everyone reads crime. But I feel like it's like I've moved from one ghetto to another, and the general attitude is not quite as progressive towards it amongst the general readership. I don't know, but
I think why people are probably saying that is I wouldn't normally read science fiction because probably don't. But I think what marks this out is the same thing that marks out all of your books, is that I think more than anything, your characters are just the thing that drives everything. And I think that is the true of your standalone novels. And you were saying earlier about like, people don't sign up for the plot, it's like, it is for character. And I think you've done character really well. And I think that's what this book in the hands of someone else wouldn't have worked as well as it does, I don't think.
Yeah, maybe. And again, this comes back to, I'm not like, I never really understand genre, and I never really, and that's not, I'm genuine about that. I kind of don't really get it. And I don't really know what it is I'm writing until like quite often I'll have finished writing it, or I'll be halfway through a draft or something, and I'll mention it to Karen or to Phil or to a friend, and they'll be like, "What?" And it's only when this one I'm like, "Oh, it's like basically E.T. meets Thelma and Louise, but it's got a telepathic octopus in it," and like, and then I sort of think, "Oh, that sounds quite weird." But to me, when I'm sure I said this to you, maybe I said it to Stuart, certainly. Like when I sit down and write a book, in my head, it's a massive bestseller. It's like Stephen King meets like, Steven Spielberg or whatever. And of course, it's not that at all, because I don't have a particularly mainstream mindset. So my idea of a massive mainstream blockbuster is this weird science fiction book that's come out. But that's what I think of it is. I think, well, surely everyone's going to love this because I've got this fucking really weird idea. And I'm not very good at understanding how it seems to other people sometimes, I think. Which I don't know if I need to. I don't think I need to work on it. I just need to keep writing the books.
I think you're doing a good job anyway. I think you're doing fine. I think you're doing fine. So there's going to be another science fiction and there's another Scouts book in the works. That's what's coming next, is it?
Yeah. So there's a Scouts book coming out in September, I think, early September. The Opposite of Lonely, and the sequel to this science fiction book. It's going to be out next March, and then who knows? My plan is to keep writing Skells books and keep writing science fiction or other stuff. I've got an idea for a fantasy novel. You'll be glad to hear that that is not swords and sandals and like witchcraft, but it is like very weird. So I don't know. Who knows?
Talking to Stuart about his next novel, which I think it's been announced, so we know it's I think we know what that's going to be about.
Yeah.
Mark's doing his Dancing Detective one that comes out later this year. I think we need to have a serious sit down with all of it. Everyone just called the fun-loving crime writers.
Please, more crime people. Even Val's latest books are like about a journalist and like.
I mean, they're much more literary than they are. I mean, like I love 1979. One of the things I loved about it most was the fact that no one dies for like 300 pages. It's just brilliant.
They're like basically like sort of social commentary, and they're just
exactly, and it's brilliant. But well, let's not talk about it. We'll talk about you. So if you haven't got it already, The Space Between Us is out in paperback and ebook now. I'm going to let you go. We've got 2 questions that we're asking everyone, and they are: what is your favorite song and your favorite novel?
Well, okay, good question. How long have we got? So I sort of, my back goes up when people say favorite song. Like, we've had a discussion because quite often, like Mark will start a conversation with top 10 albums,
yes,
or like fucking best sitcoms of the 1980s or whatever, and it's like, because we sat. Remember one night in Toronto, we sat talking about movies, like that place, and that sort of beer place, and And we're all coming up with like, you know, if you had to name 5, I mean, like every single movie that everyone mentioned was an absolute Stonewall classic.
Yeah.
They were all brilliant, or I didn't know them, but it was like, and I was like, it's not really about your best. I'm actually, that's a fucking wrong way of looking at things now. And actually, I always think about that with albums, like ever since Mark said that, and I was like, it literally changes all the time. I wouldn't sit. I mean, I listen to stuff now that is completely different to stuff I listened to, but then, you know, albums that I was massively into as a teenager mean a whole lot to you for nostalgic reasons, and you could play every fucking note of them on the drums, and you know every single bit of guitar in them and stuff like that. So I don't know. Favorite song. I don't know what's favorite song. Favorite song. Favorite song. Favorite song. So at the moment, I've been playing a couple of things live. I usually take the guitar along to book events when I do book launches. And one of the songs that I've been playing is a Wilco song called Jesus, Etc., which I have loved for 20 years or since whenever that album came out. I don't know if you know Wilco much about it.
I do,
yeah. Yeah, but that's just, it's a kind of understated piece of genius song. Like Jeff Tweedy, who's the lead singer of Wilco, he's written 2 amazing books. One's a memoir called Let's Go So We Can Get Back, which I fucking love as a title. It's become like a phrase I use every time we go out anywhere with the missus. I say, let's go so we can get back. But he also wrote a book called How to Write One Song, which is like the best book about the creative process I've ever read. It's tiny and I read it like all the time. But he writes quite oblique lyrics, which I quite like because, you know, we're storytellers and everything's clear on the page very often. Yeah. But he writes these things that are kind of more impressionistic, and I like that. And he's talking about how he writes lyrics. But that song, Jesus, Etc., it's incredibly uplifting somehow, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
I can't really explain it. It just makes me happy in my heart when I hear it. So let's go for that.
Okay. And favorite novel?
Favorite novel? I am going to choose a novella. Is that allowed?
Yes, go on. That's like I've got rules. Jesus.
Oh, so you didn't send me the rules and regulations for me, didn't you?
I mean, this is not professional. I literally stopped so I could answer the door.
Favorite novel. Okay, am I going to choose novella? Yeah, let's choose novella. So I am going to say Come Closer by Sarah Gran. So I think Sarah Gran is the most underrated writer still writing today. I think she is fucking genius, and this was her 3rd book maybe, but she's written, her first book was like a literary novel, which is brilliant. Then she wrote a kind of 1950s heroine New York thing, and she wrote a series of like weird existential detective novels. But this is a horror novella, Come Closer, about a central character who may or may not be possessed by a demon, and it's possibly about a woman's nervous breakdown, or she might be actually possessed by a demon. And it goes in like, it's only about 180 pages or something like that, maybe not even that. It's got the best opening chapter of all time. It's fucking hilarious and awful at the same time. It's one of those books where it's just women just behaving worse and worse, really badly, and things just escalate extraordinarily. But you're kind of on her side because she might be possessed by a demon, but she might also just be an absolute bitch. And it's so well written. The balance of it is brilliant, and there are just bits in it where there's a scene where she stubs a cigarette out on her boyfriend's leg, and it just, when I first read that, I had to get, you know, sometimes you just have to put a book down and get up and walk around a bit.
Yeah.
I was just like, holy shit, what have I just read? That is fucking insane. So there you go. Come Closer by Sarah.
Brilliant. Doug, thank you so much for your time. I think you're the longest one yet, but we're going for a longer. Hey, matron. And I think I could have gone on for another 2 hours easily.
Oh, it was a good chat, man. Good chat.
It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for being on. If you haven't already, get a copy of The Space Between Us or any of Doug's backlist. You can go and find it anywhere. Thank you so much for being on, Doug, and I'll see you very soon, I'm sure.
Yeah,
on stage somewhere, banging away on drums.
Cheers, Luca. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, man. See you soon.